I think there's an opportunity to do something different in the CPA space. And so I started my journey there serving small business owners, because I decided I'm not that interested in continuing to work with Fortune 500 companies where we're just having meetings about future meetings when maybe we might decide something. And typically speaking, all the forecasts and key performance indicators and all the stuff that we were building were not really being used by our stakeholders, whether it was the marketing team or whether it was operations, et cetera. It was really building out metrics and things for ourselves, things that we as finance people would use. So realized that there was a need to do some things different in the small business space. And so set about doing that about 10 years ago. And what I realized through that process is that there were some pretty common themes in the small business space, and maybe even universally in business, which is that folks were not taking what I call asymmetric bets. So business owners were taking a lot of gambles. Most business owners are almost professional gamblers. So they're taking a lot of gambles, but they're not asymmetric bets, meaning that the upside is substantially greater than the downside. And in fact, what they're really doing is, if anything, taking bets where the downside is greater than the upside. And so over time, the amount of risk that they're taking on was just growing significant day after day, week after week. And the way it would manifest is that they're constantly putting out fires, sleepless nights, crazy cash volatility. Hey, my bank account's the highest it's ever been. Oh, everything's awesome. Oh crap, I'm almost out of money. How did I swing in 2 months from like the best ever to like the worst ever, and we're in dire straits. And so what I realized is that business owners were primarily making decisions, one, based off revenue, and two, based off bank account. Revenue, bank account. And so they really weren't making decisions based off QuickBooks. And they might espouse, they might say, I want to do that. But it's a rare business owner that does. In part because QuickBooks is like 2 to 4 weeks too late. And all the KPIs and et cetera, they didn't even really have time to look at them. So I set about trying to figure out what could we do different? How do I call a spade a spade? Because it's not one business owner or two business owners or even 10 or 20 business owners that are having this problem. It's thousands, because I've now worked with thousands of business owners, all with very similar issues in a wide cross-section of different businesses. I've resisted until recently getting really niche specific with our accounting firm. So I've worked with, name an industry, we've served them. And the issues, the core issues were the same, which was cash flows all over the place, and risk is constantly growing, and there's a disconnect between revenues and expenses, and ultimately they're making decisions based off the bank account and what revenue is. So started to figure out what really people want is certainty. And so what does that actually mean? What does certainty really mean? And what it means is actually taking actions where you are going to get closer to the things that you really want. Every action should be getting you closer to the things that you want. And that's so obvious. Like, yeah, of course, every action I should be taking is going to get me closer to the things that I want. But sadly, that's not the case. That oftentimes the actions that people are taking are not getting closer to the things they want. They're getting them further away. So step one is we actually have to define what it is that we want. What are the things that we care about? What I call our profit priorities? What are they? Step one, define those. In order, what is number one? What is number two? What is number three? You can have 10, you can have 20, it doesn't matter. What are your priorities? And they're personal to you, they're preferences. And so they're not somebody else's priorities. Just like it's not somebody else's business. You get to make all the rules. So what are your priorities? What are they? Is it 10 more hours a week of free space? Is it 20? Is it a house? Is it a second house? Is it retiring your spouse, retiring your parents? Is it buying some horses? Is it buying a boat? Doesn't matter. What are they? Let's list them out. And then let's rank order them. Because number one, as a small business owner, we have to flip our mindset from maximize to optimize. It's like, that's just a gear shift we have to do right now. Maximize, optimize. All the conventional finance stuff, the things I've had to unwind, were about maximize. You're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You're responsible for what? Maximizing shareholder value. That is your fiduciary responsibility. Maximize shareholder value. And so everything you do is maximize it the most today, most amount of money now. And so you can do that as a Fortune 500 company. You can't maximize as a team of one or a team of 5 or a team of 20. You have to optimize. What's the most efficient path forward? Complete mental shift. That means we have to sequence our priorities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can't accomplish all 5 of them or 10 of them at once. So we have to rank order them. And we have to say when we want to achieve them by. So if I want 10 more hours a week, when? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 2 months from now? We need to define what our timeline is to achieve each of those priorities. So that's step one. So that's step one basically in the Profit Priority app is what are your priorities and when do you want to achieve them by in sequential order. Step two is to go, well, what do I have currently? Like, what is my current position? What are my assets? What are my liabilities? Within my assets, do I get any sort of rate of return? Do I earn 0.1% or 5% or 10% on those assets? Because if I have some rate of return, they're going to grow over time. And then what is my current cash flow? Do I have any money left over after I pay all my bills? Because if I do, I should be allocating those towards my priorities. So step two is defining what are our current assets, what are our liabilities, what's our additional cash flow, and what is the rate of return that we're going to earn on those assets and that additional cash flow. Because step three is now we take those assets and we assign them to our priorities to the extent possible. So if we got money in our bank accounts, we can assign those to our specific priorities. And we can then see, based off how those assets are assigned to our current priorities, can I fund them now? Because potentially, once you've got all this stuff defined, you may actually be able to knock off a couple of priorities now if we're actually optimizing. So we're putting our money first to priority 1, then to priority 2, then to priority 3. Oftentimes people don't realize they could lock in a priority now if they weren't trying to lock in 6 priorities right now. So I'm in this new office space and I'm having internet issues, unfortunately, but for $2,500 a month, I got 10 more hours back per week because I don't have I'm right by my house. So I locked in a priority. There was a cost associated with that, $2,500 a month to achieve a priority. I could do that now. So we assign those assets to our priorities. And then what happens is that we can now do the math. We can now calculate it and say, given each priority and how we've assigned our assets and all the different rates of return that we get on each of those assets, can we hit our targeted dates? So will the assets grow fast enough to achieve those goals? And if not, how much additional cash do we need to actually make that happen? And so we're going to see how much additional cash we need to actually fund all those priorities. And then we can compare it to how much additional cash we say we have. And the difference is how much we need to grow our business to be able to achieve everything that we've defined. That's what the app does currently. It's answering the question that people don't actually ever answer, which is how much do I actually need to grow my business to fund all of my priorities? That's what it's answering currently. The mythical question. But you can only answer that question if you define your priorities and you define your current assets and you define when you're going to achieve all those, when you want to achieve all those priorities. And then the beauty of this is that the reality is priorities change over time. So as you add new priorities, you go back, you add them in, or you change the order, which is totally fine. They're your priorities. And so if I change the order of when I want to achieve them by, or I change the date ranges, so I don't want to do it in 5 years, I want to do it in 1 year, the app will tell you how much additional cash you need to make that happen. So it's solving the problem, the fundamental problem of how much do I need to grow? What are the steps I'm going to take? What are the things I'm actually trying to get closer to? And how much do I actually need to make that happen? That's what the current version of the app does. And so each business partner has their own assets and liabilities and have their own priorities. And so they would that would be independent or their own sort of account. Once we have that defined, then the future versions of the app are where we're layering in the business-specific tools. The tools that give you analytics and tell you what to do next based off how much money you have in your accounts and your revenue. Because again, that's what business owners focus on. And so we've built out some algorithms and some rules around how much you should have in your bank accounts based off the size of your business and the activity of your business. And we're ultimately giving you a readiness score. And the readiness score is how ready is your business to take on new things, additional risk. Because the issue is that if I change my attention, if I take time off, will my business collapse while I'm gone? The readiness score can tell you that. How ready are you? And tell you what the things you need to focus on. Is it cash flow engineering? Is it getting cash now? Is it all the tools and things that we teach in the Wealth Q&A community? And so it's telling you, based off the volatility and within your bank accounts and revenue and some of the parameters that it's learning over time, how ready you are to be able to take time off, how ready you are to be able to focus on a new business activity. But it's more real time. It does not require you to go in and record all your transactions because that's not real time. That's not the reality. So that's what we're building towards. But we've got to start with the priorities and know how much additional cash do we need to actually make this happen. So version 2, version 3, we got a whole roadmap of how we're going to build this out over the next year. We're starting with arguably the most important thing, which is defining what you need. What do you really need? Cash. Until you know that, you're just going after more. So I'm on a little bit of a soapbox on that because more is not necessarily the answer. Sometimes I run the numbers and I can tell clients, actually, if you just keep doing what you're doing, you're going to be able to fund all your goals. Like if cash and assets, everything grow at the rates that they have been, you're going to hit all of your milestones. I mean, how powerful is that to actually know that? Because then the next step is I got to reduce my risk. I got to do the things to make sure that cash does continue to come in at the current rate. That becomes the highest priority, is if I know I can lock in all my goals. But we assume we need more, when sometimes what we need is simply more certainty. Yep. So that's the app. That's why I built it. That's why I've spent the last 20 years really thinking of learning about business and finance, and then the last 10 years in particular thinking about certainty and what are the ways that business owners, small business owners, actually think about business, process things. How do I build tools that they're going to use that can modify their behavior and get them closer to the things that actually matter? And from what I see out there, those tools don't exist. There's, I was looking at like the top fintech apps coming out, and it's like some more invoicing tools and some more bookkeeping tools coming out, and some ways to more efficiently borrow funds. And all those things are great, but they don't really, and there's all these like dashboarding tools, but they require people to record transactions, set up your dashboards, and maintain them. They don't tell you today how much risk your business has and whether or not you're going to be able to fund all your priorities. So that's why we built it.
That's I kicked off the you alluded to it too. I kicked off the call initially and just said, hey, this is it's for some reason, and I think we have some ideas as to why, but for some reason this is the thing that coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, business owners, even non-consultants, they just avoid defining like what actually matters.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult I know for you and for me to really know somebody. Like we have clients and you really know what matters to them. And it's painful to see them do things because it's bigger or faster or whatever, and know they're getting further away from the things that make them happy. Like that's a pain point for me to see people chase that stuff.
Well, to wax philosophic a little bit more on that front. So everybody on this call can guarantee doesn't want that cliche moment on their deathbed, right? Where you have all those regrets. You're like, I sure wish that I would have actually spent time on the things that mattered. We've all seen the TV shows and movies of that moment. We all don't want it. And I'm certain that everyone feels that way. But the only way that you can somewhat guarantee that that's not going to happen is if you define the things that you want, your priorities and your timelines. And you're not locking it in forever, right? Because those priorities can change. 6 months ago, I didn't think that I was going to get an office right by my house. That wasn't on my radar at all. But things changed. COVID happened. The bridge that connects West Seattle to downtown is closed indefinitely for the next 4 to 6 years. It's creating a forcing function. There's a new priority. So things change. So we're not locking in forever. But we got to get clarity, define them, put timelines on them. Otherwise, we're just at the risk of always chasing for more. And we know how that works out. I mean, we just know how that works out. Always being in there's so many cliche stories of that maybe you get lucky and overnight you become a millionaire or billionaire, but it's just very, very few actual examples of that. That's why we both push that book, How to Fly a Horse, that dispels the narrative of like the overnight genius, the overnight success. The Certainty app current version came together over the last several months, 3 to 4 months, but it's the culmination of like 20 years worth of thinking about it. So it's unlikely we're all just going to like all of a sudden, win the lottery or have this home run. Maybe that happens. We should put ourselves in positions where it might. But we know intuitively that more is not necessarily the answer that's going to prevent us from that cliche deathbed moment. It's actually sitting down, defining those priorities, seeing how much additional funds we need, and then making sure that the actions that we're taking are getting us closer to that. And we've done all these other coaching programs before. And the thing that always irritates me in other masterminds and other things is this idea that there's one way. Like you either want $100 million business or you're an idiot. It's like, there's not one way. If there was one way, we'd all just run a franchise business. There's not one way to run a business. There's not one type of business. And everything comes back to, it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on what you want. But I mean, it really does. That's like our answer. Anytime someone asks us like, well, should I buy this thing? Should I invest in marketing? Should I hire somebody? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I could look at your balance sheet and your P&L, and those might tell me if you have enough money to be able to do that. But I actually have to understand what you want, what you're optimizing for, to know if this is the right next move. Because it could be, if the thing you want the most is 10 more hours per week, it could be that the move that you're planning actually gets you further away from that. And so we think we're taking steps that are in our best interest when in fact they often take us further away.
And it's good to have, it's crucial to have the priorities written down and rank ordered, because oftentimes, even if we talk to people, I do it to myself and my partners, Dan and I will do it back and forth. Hey, let's do this. It'll make money. Yeah, but isn't this the priority? Right. And then the conversation is, oh yeah, you're right. And we just prevented calamity. Or, oh yeah, but priorities have changed, which is really important to bring, like front and center, instead of operating. You have people in your life, your partners, but also spouses, kids, like people close, that are operating off of some assumption of what you prioritize. So I think just having it written down and referring back to it and kind of sharing that language with the people that matter it saves a lot of time and headache.
Yeah. The default, because we're all stuck in maximize. Mm-hmm. The default when you're in maximize is more, because we're trying to have the most of everything today. So conventional finance is serving the CEO of Fortune 500 businesses who are required to maximize shareholder value. They're not doing something wrong per se at a macro level. Individually, CEOs may be, doing moral or ethical things that we wouldn't align with. But inherently, they are required to maximize shareholder value. So all of those tools are built around that framework. And conventional business school, all of that comes back to maximize. But you're serving thousands or hundreds of thousands of shareholders when you're a company at that level. And so you can't possibly tend to each individual shareholder's preferences and desires. And so necessarily the solution is, well, let's just get them more cash and they can decide what they're going to do with it. Because we can't possibly, when we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of shareholders or millions of shareholders, try to help each one individually achieve their priorities and tailor the business to that. The only thing we can do is just give them more cash.
Yep. Individually, each one of those investors just needs to get the Certainty app for themselves.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So they can get clarity and actually figure out, can they achieve those priorities? Can they fund them? So it's just a different way of thinking about it. A lot of the tools and distinguishments that are out there are a very, very rigid model. And so we go like, the solution to chaos is something very rigid, So we just need to be the only way you're going to be able to achieve your goals is if you count every dollar, every day, every second, and allocate it to all your individual bank accounts and so on and so forth, which is sort of that, picking on a little bit, like the profit first model. I think there's some things that work really well about it, but it requires you to be super, super rigid in response to chaos, that in response to most business owners just kind of ignoring it. And it's really hard to sustain chaos, or hard to sustain rigid frameworks that are the answer to chaos. So again, just a different way of kind of framing this and looking at it is that it's much easier to sustain frameworks that you've opted into, because they're going to actually get you closer to the things that you care about and want. You know that from fitness and health, in your previous lifetimes, where folks always think the answer is just work out more.
Here's the one-liner that it either hits people right in the gut or they just roll their eyes and walk away. is that your maximum achievability is not your maximum maintainability. And that's kind of I think about that every time we talk about the profit priorities in the app and stuff. It's always thinking about the sustainability of what we're doing, right? Not blowing ourselves up, as Jeff Spencer would say. And that's the risk we run when we default to more, is maximum achievability. That high of a peak may very well blow us up, and it's not sustainable.
I heard this anecdote about Carl Lewis over the weekend, the famous Olympian, and how in a race at the halfway mark, if you looked at all of his competitors and you looked at him, his face and body position and all of this sort of things was unchanged, and that the other competitors were straining, and because they were trying to go like put in something extra, right? And that the solution, this is that sort of more framework, and that he was able to win, and it seems almost counterintuitive because it was a consistency. It's like I'm running this race with the same consistent flow all the way to the end, and so when you look at like the folks who win long term, it's because of that consistent form, consistent effort towards their priorities, towards their goals. Not trying to change your methodology halfway through the race because you're trying to adjust to what other people are doing. You got to follow the methodology. It's like you got to dance with the person who brought you. Like you've got to stick to what you've trained towards, your methodologies, to give yourself a chance to win. It's better to, in my opinion, the worst scenario is when you lose, and you lose playing someone else's game. The coach who got to the playoffs and got to the championship with a specific style, who then halfway through the game wants to throw out the playbook to try to match what the competitor is going to do or is doing, and then loses. That's a much bigger disgrace, in my opinion, because you're not conforming to your own identity. You're not putting yourself in the best chance to win simply based off data, because you've got all the data from all the previous games, all the previous practices that show the results.
Speaking of playing your game, that is in the if you rolled into the app by the end of the day today, you get the stealth sales training, which Tina asked for. I'll make sure that gets. Again, we have to do it all in one fell swoop because we're kind of giving you guys backdoor access. It's not directly through the app. The play your game, both play your game worksheets are included as the bonus for the Certainty app. So I think it's a really powerful thing to, if you're going to go down playing your game, but you should be playing your game all the time, regardless.
And the data just says, and it's overwhelming, that you're more likely to win when you are playing your game.
Yep.
So anyone who signs up today gets lifetime access to all the profit priority modules and all the upgrades that are coming, and some of those include directly connecting to your bank accounts. So you don't have to key things in. It's going to update for you over time. There's going to be some other kind of achievement, sort of gamifying it a bit, so that incentivizing you to continue to update and monitor and see that you are actually making progress, and you can show historically how your progress has changed. In other words, maybe 3 months ago, it says that you're not able to fund your goals. And now you fast forward to today, and based off the adjustments that you've made, you now have sufficient cash flow to be able to hit those objectives. So it's going to give you some bunch of reporting and analytics to show your progress. Make the app update more real time. We're improving the user interface quite a bit, and that's just on the profit priority module front. We're adding in all the other components over time. The bank account porting, the readiness stuff that we teach in cash flow engineering and revenue multiplication, all that stuff. So ultimately, the app is going to be sort of like the way I use the Oura Ring. Oura Ring tracks sleep and tells me how ready I am to take on the day. It's one of the first things I look at in the morning. I pull up my phone, I look and go like, okay, here's what my score is. That helps kind of inform what I'm going to do to a degree to the day, how I might modulate things. If my heart rate was elevated and my body temperature was higher than normal, my respiratory rate wasn't great, I'm probably not going to push myself so hard when I exercise, or I'm going to try to get to bed sooner that night, for example. And I'm going to make sure that in my case, I don't eat any dairy because I've got issues with that. So I use it to kind of inform small tweaks that I'm going to make to my day. The intention is that the Certainty app will be that equivalent for your business to know, not necessarily how to modulate things a bit, how to make the small tweaks to make sure that you're staying the course and getting closer. So it'll replace the need to sign into all your different bank accounts because it'll all connect and show you in one spot.
Excellent. Well, we're coming up on time here. Offer closes tonight. We have Trey, Callie, Devin, Nicole, and Sandy just dropped in. They are now Certainty app users. We'll get you access by the end of the day today, plus access to the bonuses, sales training, and all that stuff.
Cool. Anyone who's joined any of our stuff before, and I think there's several people here that can provide proof, is that we always try to over deliver. So meaning that people who bought, last May, people joined Wealth Q&A community for one-time fee of $297. And since then they got the full cash flow engineering class, revenue multiplication, like all the stuff that wasn't even planned, tax optimization roadmap. So always trying to make sure that people who are early adopters get substantially more than what they paid for, really as a thank you for taking the risk and giving us a shot. So app is going to evolve and improve, and I appreciate the feedback you guys are going to send, and just know that we will reward you for trusting us in the early stages, and that means a lot to me.
Always take care of the early adopters, and that'll we'll see who that is by the end of the day today. Jeff says Dan and Nick definitely over deliver. Thank you. Washingtonian, fellow Washingtonian, even though I'm not really there. And I'll send an email. Anybody that wants the second half of this recording, I'll send it to you, as well as a link at cfeclass.com. I just put it in the chat /certainty. Last chance to jump on it for $97 for lifetime, plus all the bonuses. And we'll start cranking out some training, some free trainings around how to use it, and some cool, shortcuts, and make sure everybody understands how to use it and how it implements and integrates into the trainings and all that stuff.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, people who sign up, there'll be an email each day telling you what the next thing is for the next 5 days, telling you what the next step is that you should do.
Perfect.
Cool. All right. Thanks for everyone's patience, and appreciate everyone who jumped in. And yeah, I'm excited about this.
We'll see you in the member area.
All right. Take care.